is my place, and I am welcome.
Now it's time for Eric. Take it away, Eric.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to come back and join you, and this time, yes, live. And I just want to say it's a real gift to be invited to any place, to be able to talk about these ideas and to explore and share parts of my journey from 40 years because it has become my life and the things that I want to talk about most, because I really do want to see healing change in the world. So welcome to all of you in Unity York region, and to those of you from across the country, whether you're in Calgary or Barrie or Moncton or somewhere else. And as you see, I'm, as Reverend Pat says, in Vancouver on the shores of the West Coast. I'll also use this slide as a screen check for you, just to make sure that you can see all parts of the screen, because I use PowerPoint a lot. And so if you need to modify something on your screen to make sure that you can see everything, please do now. So as Reverend Pat said, my topic for today is, where is the power in our lives? You know, it's, as we've heard already, power is the one of the 12 powers themes that's used for May. But, you know, this may strike you as a little strange. It might seem strange to talk about power in the context of a spiritual service, because for many of us, our thoughts and feelings about power tend to be kind of negative. So think about it this way with me. Think about money and power. Think about relationships and power. Think about business and power, or think about religion and power. And when we think about those in that context, you know, power has tended to become a pretty dirty word for many of us as we think about how power is used. So my first question for the day is, why is that? You're probably already getting some ideas for yourself. These are the ones that have come to me. Historically, power has often been used for two purposes. One is for self-interest. How do I gain more for myself by getting more from others, by manipulating others? And power is been used for power over other people, whether it's control or force or pressure or bullying or abuse. Power has just not been used in wise and humane ways. Back in the mid-1800s, Lord Acton, who was a member of the British Parliament in the 1860s, said this about power. Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Whew, take a breath. Maybe you feel a bit gobsmacked by, like, this canine friend who goes, oh my God, why would I want that, for heaven's sakes? Well, fair question, and that's what we're going to explore today. In Unity, as Pat has already said, we take a different perspective on power. That, as she said, all power actually comes from God, that original source of life and good in the world. You may, if you've been around Unity for any time, remember this phrase: there is only one presence and one power in the universe and in my life. God, the good, omnipotent. Those words were written by Eric Butterworth back in the 60s, one of the famous writers in the Unity movement. But it's been a teaching and an affirmation in Unity for really most of the 100+ years that it's been around. It's often called, in fact, one of the first of Unity's 5 core principles. One presence and one power, God, the good, omnipotent. To our higher self, Power is actually a spiritual capacity to create change for the good, for healing and transformation. And that's why we work with ideas like the 12 powers that we use each month of this year, because those are the qualities of mind, of consciousness, that help us to identify with the greater power within us. Now, maybe you might feel a little bit like this little critter saying, what a relief to think of power in a different way. And it's those two sides that I want to explore this morning. How do we make sense of two such different worlds of belief, two aspects of mind? From power corrupts to power is the ultimate source of good from God. And I think this picture at the bottom of these two faces, so to speak, holds a bit of the clues. In A Course in Miracles, which I've studied for close to 40 years, it says human beings have what's called a split mind. Let me describe it a little more for you. We have our small self, our human self, the mind that's limited to just our physical body. And we have our larger self, a mind that is universal, connected to the heart, connected to light, connected to all of love. And this is the split within humanity. Our small self sees itself as separate from everything else. Just as my body is separate from yours, from nature around us, our small self is separate from everything else in the world. We see ourselves as limited physically and in many different ways as well, lacking in power or in money or in love. Life to the small self is fear-based. But from our larger self, a very different perspective comes. We see ourselves as connected and whole to the rest of life. Unlimited, truly unlimited in our power, as Karen Drucker was singing about, and rich inside. We see life as being love-centered, the source from which all power, life, and joy and peace come. Back in the 1950s, a Unity writer by the name of Lou Austin described it this way in a children's book that he wrote. He described it, the little me and the great me. And that's really the same essence that A Course in Miracles write about and many spiritual paths write about. This duality of self that we experience in the world and the greatness of what we're coming to recognize is our actual truth in spiritual nature. How each self sees power is very different. So let's look first at the small self. Our small self, or the little me, says, we don't have enough power. Power is out there in other people and other things. Everyone and everything else has it. And we have to get power from those things or those people. That's the way the small self looks at the world. As a result, like Reverend Pat said, COVID, illness, money, the economy, people, the weather, all of these are seen as having the power. And I put it this way, all these have power to hurt or control my life. That tends to be how we feel as human beings, thinking through our small self. And in fact, it's this mindset that tends to focus on those things I mentioned earlier, self-interest, getting from others, and power over controlling others so as to, and this really sums it up, to protect ourselves from the power of others and what lies around us. This small self is always in fear of what others in the world will do to us. And we're always trying in some way to protect ourselves, aren't we? To say the right thing, to do the right thing, to show up dressed in the right way, to look good, to have enough money or position or whatever it is. How the other mind, the larger mind, sees power is very different. How the larger self or the great me sees power is kind of captured in that prayer for protection that we do at the end of each unity service. One of the lines we say is, the power of God protects us. Very different way of looking at the world from the small self, isn't it? Why is this true? Because we were created by God. In our spiritual worldview, God is the ultimate original source, creating in its kind, in its image, in its likeness of all things. So God is the source of power, and because we were created by that source, that is what we are as well. How that larger self sees power is another phrase I've captured. It. Nothing in the world has power over my true self, that Christ self inside of me. That self is within all of us because it's not a personal, individual self, it's a shared, universal self. The strength of God is my strength, as the Daily Word said. God is my strength, unfailing quick, as Hannah More Kohaus wrote many decades ago, in which I was raised with in unity. Another affirmation in the Daily Word, I feel the power of divine strength flowing through me. So here's the challenge that we face as human beings. Think about what your honest reaction is to those unity ideas. Is it something like this canine that says, yeah, got it, dude. I get that. I understand that. That just kind of totally identify with that. Or remember, your honest reaction is what I'm looking for here. Is it something more like this? Are you kidding me? What are you smoking? Are you crazy? And that's the paradox, the challenge of human nature. Because what I just described about unity beliefs isn't our worldly experience, is it? And it's important to remember that these ideas are bigger than any of us. They're lofty, they're huge. So don't put me or any other spiritual speaker or teacher on a pedestal. We're all students. We're all journeyers on the path of trying to live into this way of thinking, way of being, and this experience. And that's the purpose of these 12 powers, is to help us to live into and grow into that larger self in truth of who it's said that we are. On the screen, if you can see it, and if you can't see it, I'll describe some of these are the 12 powers that we study this year, from faith to wisdom, imagination, understanding, zeal, and of course this month of power. And you know, a couple of weeks ago, somebody in Unity White Rock described these 12 powers as spiritual power tools. I thought it was a great phrase. Now, not to be confused with these kinds of power tools, power saws, drills, chainsaws, staplers. Those power tools are important for making our worldly living better, but these are the spiritual power tools that we have to access, whether it's caring or imagination of what's possible, healing, and prayer or meditation. There are so many different spiritual power tools, and we study 12, one each month this year. To understand this kind of power better, what I'd like to do briefly is to look at it through 4 lenses, 4 ways of looking at power. The first one of these is what I call power to change ourselves and our lives. And the first one of those is the power of our thoughts. And then it's the power of our choices and the power of our actions. These are the foundation stones of spiritual or empowered living. And spiritual really means non-physical. Don't think of it in an airy fairy way. It is the essence that is not just the physicality, but the true non-physical essence of who we are. And through these things, our thoughts, our choices, our actions, we can change how we treat others, ourselves, and the entire world. And that is real power. It's power from the inside, power that comes through us, that radiates out to everyone and to everything and to the entire universe, is my belief. Very different from that small self that tries to take limited power from other people. This one is the universal power. And it comes from 2 of the 12 powers that we'll study this year. One is will and one is strength. Will is the willingness to change our thoughts and our choices and our actions, and the strength to stay with the shift in thinking and acting that takes us to that higher ground, that higher place. And just as a little secret in these few slides, every word that I underline is actually one of the 12 powers for this year, just as will and strength are. The second power is the power to open to that larger self, that Christ mind, the Holy Spirit, the God self, whatever you want to call it. It's opening in practical ways, though, in a worldly experience, to things like peace. That's the one that cracked me open 40 years ago. I wasn't very peaceful. I was in deep conflict in my life, my marriage, and my work. And in A Course in Miracles, it says, why not make peace your goal? Because peace is the doorway to the larger presence and the larger self. And that's why I've continued to make it my goal daily. Opening to our larger self is also about opening to our vision, our passion, to the possibilities of life. These 2 12 powers are called imagination and zeal. We know that life can be so much more. We can also open to inspiration and guidance. The 12th power is called wisdom, that the deeper mind, the wisdom, the Christ self, will in fact guide us through inspiration and guide us as to what would be more powerful and more effective in our lives if we're willing to listen. And then another simple one that I call trusting and trying, which is the 12th power of faith. It's trusting that the new ideas, the intuitive ideas, the angel ideas, as sometimes they're called, are actually useful to us. And if we try them out, they will provide fruit, better results in our lives. And that will be part of the encouragement to continue listening to that greater, deeper, quieter voice inside of us. The third lens is the power to release our smaller self. We can do that in quite a number of different ways. Here are some that have come to me. The first is what I'll call removing the blocks to love's awareness, or as A Course in Miracles more specifically says, removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. You see, if our natural truth, our infinite heritage, is that we are love, and if we're not experiencing that full time in this world, then something has come into our consciousness, into our minds to block that. Things like our limiting beliefs of who we are, of what we can do, of what life is, of who others are. Perhaps it's negative judgments on ourselves and others. These definitely block our awareness of love and connection. There's another one that I like to work with, which is releasing others in the world in our thoughts. That as we see something that is not loving, that is painful, that is a disaster or a calamity in the world, to say to myself, I see it, but this is not the truth of who these people or what the nature of God or reality really is. So at a deeper level, this is not the truth. And then to say to the higher self or the Holy Spirit or whatever name you use, choose for me, choose the reality that is the expression of your truth on earth. And that by giving over to that higher self and inviting it in to choose for me, and my belief is, and my experience has been, that my experience of life and the things that show up around me change. We can talk more about that at the end of the service if you want to on the Zoom call. The fourth lens is what I call the power to see with understanding. 3 words: compassion, acceptance, and forgiveness. 3 simple words, but challenging to live, yet empowering to do so. You know, the truth is, of human beings, we all make mistakes. We all do things that are wrong or unkind or just outright selfish or egotistical or self-interested and power over, right? We have guilts and we have fears. And it's important to own them, to accept what we experience in this level of the world, our reality. We have pain, we have illnesses, we have weaknesses. And this step is about having compassion for these parts of ourselves and when we see them in others. It's about when these show up, holding these in our hearts and in our minds in a gentle way and seeing beyond them to the truer nature of who we and others are. Compassion, acceptance, and that biggie, forgiveness. Each of these steps, in my experience, helps us to shift from using the power of our small self to using the power on a moment by moment, hour by hour basis to our larger self. They help us to move from feeling powerless in the world or trying to change or control or dominate others to finding our own power, and then to discovering a power greater than just our own power and living into that. With each step, our power to change our life and the world grows. And it really does grow in the way that that graphic showed. Our ability to radiate a loving power, a peaceful power, a gentle power, and yet a presence, a healing, calming presence, and to transform through our words and our actions our world are beyond even our knowing, our imagination. But, and here's the but, right? We've all got buts. Just as with worldly power tools like these ones on the screen, power saw, power drill, it takes learning and practice. We don't get away without doing those. Just as you wouldn't want this hairdresser to chop your hair off with a chainsaw if she wasn't practiced and skilled at doing that, right? It's just the way it is. We have to learn and practice how to use these spiritual power tools. So let me sum it up in a few different ways. Power doesn't have to be oppositional, angry. That's power guided by the ego. that little scared self inside all of us. Instead, power can be, as Wendy Carr said a few weeks ago, a gentle power. Gentle, yet strong. Loving, yet transformative. Personal, yet also shared. It's the best of both feminine and masculine power as we see them in the world, because the power of God flows through all forms. It's power guided by the Spirit. A few weeks ago, I received an email from Hay House, the publisher of Louise Hay's work, Wayne Dyer and others, and it said this: "You are a wellspring of power." And I thought about that, and I pulled out my notepad and my quill pen. Doesn't everybody use a quill pen these days? I pulled it out and started to write, and what I began to realize was how many ways we have power in our world. We have the power to be still and to listen inside, to speak up when we're called to do so, and to act on our loving thoughts. We have the power to care, to help one another, to be inspired and to inspire others, and to do good in the world. We have the power to heal with our past and to imagine a different future. We have the power to ask for help in creating it, both from people around us and from our divine source. And finally, we have the power to be channels for the presence of God wherever we are, because wherever we are, God is. So I'd invite you to think of yourself this week as a wellspring of power, as the Daily Word said, rooted in the inexhaustible wellspring of the divine. What power for good do I have might be a question you might reflect on this week. What power for good do I have? And finally, how will I use that power this week? I know there's been a lot there. Take a breath, sit back, relax as we go into music and then meditation.
Settle back, close your eyes, free your mind, just be. Watch your breath come and go as it takes you out to sea. God is here, loving you. Hear the oceans roar. Go with Him, let the peace bring you home once more. Let your thoughts drift away. You don't need them here. You are in a quiet place where trust replaces fear. Feel the beating of your heart, feel the air upon your skin. Listen to the silence. God is calling, go
And as you rest in that gentle place, and we thank Bethany for one of the most beautiful invitations to meditation that I've ever heard. Take a gentle breath. Feel it come in through your nostrils and pulse through your body. And in that quiet, gentle place, begin to recognize that larger presence, that larger self that some call God or Spirit or the universe. It matters not what you call it. What's important is that you experience it. And take another breath. And as you relax, perhaps you feel a bubble of joy percolate from deep inside of you. Maybe it's a grin or a smile. Maybe it's an energy that starts to rise inside of you. That's the spirit. Human spirit, divine spirit, doesn't matter. They merge. Just be aware of it. And take another breath. And as you relax, perhaps you hear the echo and echoes of eternity ripple through your mind. Maybe you hear that longing, that sweet yet deep longing for more safety, more peace, more knowing what to do, more ability to help heal and transform your life and our world. And take another breath. And now, in a few moments of silence, listen to the voice for the divine speak to you. And now, as you begin to hear my voice again, feel your seat on the chair. Feel your back supported. Begin to feel the tingling in your hands or your feet. Begin to allow your eyes to flutter, letting in the light, whatever's around you. Begin to come back into the room. Know that what you've just touched isn't just your imagination. It is very real. And the more you touch it, each hour, each day, the more you begin to experience the presence of God, of love, of the true holiness of who you are. And with that, I turn it back over to Reverend Pat.
Thank you so much, Eric.
This is my